Welcome to The Laundry, the podcast connecting AML, financial crime, and compliance to the real world. Today we're celebrating a huge milestone because this is our 100th episode. This means 100 conversations exploring the issues that matter most both to us and to you, our listeners. In addition to reaching this milestone, we've just released the AML Megamind report, which we built from over 60 hours of the Laundry podcast, analyzed by AI to create the ultimate source of knowledge in the industry. I'm your host, Marit, CEO of Strice, and in this special episode, we are asking, what can you learn from 100 episodes of The Laundry? We'll be discussing what are the biggest discoveries from our AML Megamind report, insights from our conversations with people across the financial crime and compliance spectrum, and the valuable lessons we've taken away from this podcast journey so far. And to dive into this podcast, I am here with my two co-hosts and colleagues, Robin Laika and Fredrik Riser. And we are actually currently recording in Greece as part of a workation, a company-wide offsite with the Strice team. And just to get started, what are the two of you most looking forward to while we're here this week working?
Besides taking in the amazing view, I'm so excited about the team gathering and focusing on how we can leverage AI even more in AML processes. So one specific thing that we have set up is the hackathon, where we will look into different use cases as how to leverage AI in the Strice platform, and that's probably going to be my highlight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to spending some time with my colleagues in a non-office setting. Like getting work done, you get a different kind of creativity going when you're not in your usual environment. And also, I'm a geek, so I'm looking forward to checking out some historical sites and just exploring Greece.
Yeah, this is actually my first time in Greece ever.
Same.
So
Very cool.
I've already had quite a few Greek salads. Very happy with that. And just for our dear listeners, it's important to note that we call this offsite KYC. And that's not with a C, but SEA. So, because we're by the sea. So that's really for the compliance nerds out there to know. But let's get started looking at the AML Megamind report. As I said, we took our 100 episodes. That's 60 hours of podcast. That amounts to 370,000 words in total. So all of that went into making the report, and based on that, we gathered some trending opinions and key insights from all of our guests. And one of the biggest findings is that 70% of experts we've spoken to believe AML measures are currently inefficient. Now, that is not a shocking number in itself because it is sort of the status quo or the general opinion, but that's a number from 2024, and imagine all of the work that's gone into improving AML the past few years, and we're still at the 70% number. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think what's shocking is the fact like how inefficient it is. We know from the Megamind's report, it's quoted that approximately 1% of the money being laundered is the percentage that we're actually able to stop. So even though that sounds kind of demoralizing, it's definitely, I think, based on the conversations that we've had, more number that should be used as a wake-up call to look at what can we do better with the current investments. So are we targeting the right things? Are we being aggressive enough on the right policies and so forth?
Yeah. And I think the other aspect of it is, despite the fact that we're becoming more and more efficient, utilizing more and more technology, you have the regulator or the enforcers and their inefficiencies because, public sector, they're not usually first movers on technology. So despite our best efforts, it's like we're driving with the handbrake on, and the handbrake are the ones that need to look into the SARS and all of the reports that the banks and financial institutions sends them.
So it should be more of a wake-up call to the regulators in a sense, like, hey, look at all the investments that have been done by the banks, but it's still so inefficient because, there's only just so much a bank can do yes, of course, on like fraud and everything, you can do your best to stop those things. But in terms of giving criminals access to a bank account, which is what we really want to stop, it's okay, you can offboard a client, but they can just go across the street to a new bank and open an account there. And you can send in thousands and thousands of SARS, but if it's not getting picked up and investigated and getting criminals convicted, like, you just keep sending SARS. I mean, there's no effect. So maybe the 70% should be more of like a wake-up call to the regulators. I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
But, I mean, we are in a day and age of AI, and there is a lot of new technology being leveraged. But some of our guests in the laundry still has said that there's a lack of trained personnel. So what do you guys make of that?
Well, seeing as sort of how fast the regulatory compliance space have grown over the last 10 years and how many new employees have been handed those roles to take on the burden of doing all the manual tasks that goes into the KYC, KYB checks and all the manual data gathering and so forth, it's not a huge surprise that there's a lot of untrained personnel. That would happen in any industry where you hire a lot of new people to figure out a new space or a new way of doing things, basically. So I'd say for the trained individuals, it's more about getting systems in place and being able to spar a lot more across different companies. So the MLROs, as an example, that it's so important that we embrace the community and we set up more knowledge sharing across companies so that they are able to leverage the insights in a good way. And that's not just the insight from a tactical sort of operational KYC AML perspective, but just in terms of what learnings have they been able to gather in terms of best practices to get new employees up and running at lightning speed to take on these challenges as well.
What do you think, Robin?
Yeah, there's this thing that I'm thinking about, and it kind of seems a bit obvious, but it needs to become a cool thing as well to work within the compliance space. And if you look at, well, a couple of generations before us, what they're looking at now, they're constantly being bombarded with TikToks and, you know, people sharing how cool everything is and how easily they get exploited. We saw the Telegram group. You can, like, in less than an hour, you get exposed to being a money mule or whatever it might be. But currently, I don't feel like there's a lot of exposure to the profession of compliance. Like, how can we make that a cool job?
That's actually true, but I think actually that will be a big thing going forward, and that's something we should make an episode on that. But that's a side note, because I'm just thinking back to when we started this podcast 2.5 years ago. Then all of the topics we talked about, it was just talked about within a bank, right? And it took us quite a long time to have the first journalist on, for instance. But now I feel financial crime is like making newspaper front pages of the newspaper. But when we started, it was just like, oh, that's talked about in a bank. Or let's say the topic of sanctions. When was that ever mentioned in the media and the real world impact? It just wasn't, right? But I think actually with this change, we will be, or at least the industry should try to promote how cool working in compliance is, because it is cool, guys. At least what I think.
For a compliance nerd, yes.
No, but I think for like the financial space in general, like I know how many conferences and so forth that yes, we've been invited to speak at and so forth, both on behalf of the laundry as well as Strice. And I don't know if this is just something they say, but like at least I'm getting hooked by the phrase that this is going to be the coolest part of the day because we're talking about the financial crime space.
Yeah.
So it seems like within the financial industry, like this is actually one of the like key highlights for the industry to discuss as well.
Okay, just to kind of recap, we've talked about the 70%, like 70% of our expert guests thinks the AML measures are ineffective. We've talked about the lack of access to trained personnel, the branding of the job in a sense, but also under the 70% number, a lot of people highlighted, and it's an old story, so let's not spend too much time. It's the fragmented data and fragmented systems. So that is always a reoccurring topic. one of the things that I am so baffled with working like in an AI company is just the gap between what's happening at the forefront of AI and systems and the reality. Like a few days ago, I spoke to someone who were like, okay, we are starting this huge project, new systems, and we are going to start with UBO mapping in Excel. I mean, it's just two different worlds. So what's the deal with the fragmented systems and data?
Well, I think that was quite an interesting example in terms of, the second I hear Excel or I hear spreadsheets or any sort of static data set where people have to, type in information and that's the way they want to share that information. I'm like, whoa, we're in 2024. There's systems put into place. There's companies solely built to fix this so that the data foundation is good enough to have a single source of truth that could be leveraged in a lot of processes, AML being one of them. So, I think it's extremely important and that the tech side has a big voice in all of this and make sure that everybody knows what actually is possible, because there's a ton of use cases where it seems like people are just considering fixing it with the old ways of doing things and not necessarily looking into how to innovate and how to look at how new modern technology could be leveraged in those cases.
While we were talking, I was thinking, maybe the regulators should give all the financial institutions some slack for, let's say, a 6-month period so they could, really rip out and replace. But then I thought, well, if they communicate that, I guess all criminals would be like, let's target these banks in this 6-month period. Their controls will be, lax. Let's just get that bank account number, get access to the system while we can. So I do see why, I was like, that's the solution, but thinking about it might not be. But Robin, before we move on, your comments on the outdated systems and siloed data and, that whole shebang.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of zero-based thinking, like trying to figure things out from the beginning. If you know what you now know, how would you do it if you were doing it again? And I think like one of the things that always struck me as strange is the fact that the regulators are imposing this on the banks as that's their job, but it's the regulator telling them what they need to do, and they will also fine them if they're not doing it the way that they want them to do. So why don't the regulators provide? Why don't the regulators provide them with like a seal of approval? So if you have an approved customer, like from a government perspective, they've done all the job of collecting the data. They have the regulatory backing to do so. So they could do that and just give the bank, like this is a system where you can go in and check if a customer is approved or not.
So the regulator should take on all of that system building and all of that.
Doesn't it make sense to do it from like a centralized perspective rather than all of these? Then the banks are the fragmented workforce.
Yeah.
The banks are, okay, you can quote me on this. The banks are the fragmented workforce of the regulators.
But I can see a whole lot of reasons why you wouldn't do it that way. But taking into account the spend on AML, the amount of financial crime in society, it's like the fines being handed out. If you take all those piles of money and sum it up, like, okay, maybe we should just radically think this again. And maybe that's the job for the regulator. You guys approve all the customers then. Anyways, we need to move on to yet another exciting topic, which is sanctions. And Robin, you are Strice's self-proclaimed sanctions man. And fun fact, we do actually refer to you as that on Slack and in our internal comms, or also in external comms. So one of the big findings is that 40% of our mega minds believe sanctions are not working. Robin, break that down for me.
Well, it's a multifaceted question. So I think like you're not seeing the effects that the sanctions are supposed to have. You're seeing a lot of negative effects from the false positives. There's an incredible amount of work going into the simple act of just doing sanction screening. You're screening your customer lists and you're screening transactions. But despite all of this, we still have sanctions evasion happening like, it's so obvious that they're not even trying to hide it. They're just, shifting their trade routes, and then suddenly you have sanctions evasion. And that's like the trade part. And then you have the other parts like hidden, obscured ownership, oligarchs having like 13 companies in a chain of ownership through BVI, Barbados, Cyprus, try and be a bit more obvious with your shell companies.
So you're saying that it's mainly, us, or thinking about Iran and Russia in particular, is just the West patting ourselves on the back, being like, good job, and then it doesn't work at all. And what we've effectively done is just take geopolitics and turn it into a huge burden, like work burden on compliance teams in banks.
I think so. There is the element, like we have certain proof that sanctions do have an effect. But I think the negative effects far outweighs the ones that we are trying to enforce, or the intended effects.
Fredrik, we need to move on, but what's your thoughts on the sanctions finding?
Well, I can be quick. I think great points, and that Robin made. In general, I feel like it's not precise enough. It kind of feels like we're bringing a hammer or even a sledgehammer where we need a scalpel, because at the end of the day, sanctions, it's meant to be imposed so that it stops the very specific economy that you want to limit, or the criminals to move money through whatever infrastructure. So, and in terms of how technology could be leveraged, again, at the end of the day, that's about identifying the UBOs, the shell companies, and the trade routes. And this is a bit of a tangent, but the amount of new economies you mentioned, how this changes from a geopolitical perspective as well. It's super interesting. Like just watching how these imposed sanctions on Russia now provides complete new trade routes. Other places in the world which never sort of had a flourishing economy in the past. And unfortunately, then they're buying up infrastructure, they're making, they're building up the infrastructure for new criminal networks, basically, in other places where we aren't currently looking.
So, well, what you're saying, you are both in agreement, really.
I think
you kind of said the same thing, both of you. Like, very interesting geopolitics.
Robin made a good point, and then I just said, what Robin said.
All right, well, I guess it's good that we agree with our Megamind, the AML Megamind. And next point, 35% believe the financial industry is overregulated. I'm thinking, who are the 65% who doesn't? What do you guys think about that finding?
I can kick off. So I had a conversation with AMLA, which is now a new regulatory body, on top of the existing regulatory bodies already. And I gotta say, depending on how you define it, I'm sort of in the camp of feeling it's not regulated enough. Because it's not about it's overregulated. I think it's just about making sure it's clear enough guidelines. And I think the AMLA will be a very, very big step in the right direction on this one, seeing as they could then be more of the umbrella regulatory body that handles the overarching picture from an EU perspective, and then help the individual jurisdictions and the regulatory bodies within that make the best possible decisions from a unified economic or financial industry perspective. So what do you think, Robin?
At this point, I'm going to say what Fredrik said.
All right. So we've talked a lot about the negatives now. 70% believe that AML measures are ineffective. 40% believe sanctions aren't working. 35% think that it's overregulated. But on a positive note, 70% of our AML experts on the show are optimistic about AI's impact. I mean, we have touched upon it a little bit, but what do you guys think of it? Robin, you've been the one, on this show, we have been using AI at least to show how it can be used by criminals. And we've used AI, ChatGPT, to teach us how to launder money and teach us how to evade sanctions. So are you positive about the AI's impact, or are you more, no, this will be a criminal tool?
Not at all. I'm super positive. And, despite the fact that, we do have these episodes where we talk about if ChatGPT can be used for negative things, but we also work with this every day. So there's heaps of experiments that we've run with simple things like ChatGPT and more advanced models as well. But that kind of probably wouldn't be the best if we shared all of those ideas, because then you're giving away the secret sauce as well. But I do see it as incredibly exciting, and I am super bullish on AI's impact for good.
Yeah, same. But I also see the aspect where, criminals, they can just get started right away with AI. They don't have to think about some EU directive on AI, and they don't have a procurement department and that needs to look into data privacy, or in Europe if the data goes off to the US and all these things. So
very few governing functions within the criminal networks or the criminal enterprises, it seems.
I would love to know if there are any. If any criminals are listening, I'm like, do you guys
would
have
that
any?
be the third line of offense?
Yeah. So, but you're positive about the impact of AI as well?
Oh, definitely. I think, like, we're looking back at the numbers, like, we do need a radical shift in terms of what to do, and obviously both technology and policies goes hand in hand, and public, private, regulatory bodies, the holy trinity of decision making that needs to go into this to really make a dent or make a difference. All of them need to embrace the possibilities within AI. Anything from entity resolution, making sure we talk about the correct person or the correct business, to having even a co-pilot to help. We talked about, like, how can you train employees to be better at the risk assessments and so forth. Having a co-pilot is like, it's right there. It would guaranteed help anybody that would start that project today. 6 months down the line, you'll see immense benefits.
Yeah, I think also in terms of AI, there's something that's show don't tell in terms of leadership and that. I wish the regulators took like a huge leap forward here and led by example, being like, hey, we are serious about deploying AI in our internal with us, and also having the financial crime units in the police also being like, we are using AI, just all the public sector really leading by example, so the banks also can see that the ones that they are serious about it, so maybe it's easier for them as well. But we are nearing the end here, but we talked about some findings, but over to you guys. Are there any findings that you think are particularly important to highlight?
Well, I think, for me at least, seeing that this report is based on what we've been able to gather from information for the last 2.5 years. It's been close to 100 episodes. So at least what I've learned and what I find particularly interesting is how much of a unified sort of agreement there are to what are the challenges. But it's back to, like, it seems there's too much of a siloed approach. Everybody has a lot of great things going for them, but it's too much of an one island approach, kind of, where it's not connected enough. And if I'm going to, like, leave one very important finding on my end, at least, is just like the community and the network. That's the, like, innovation, community and network. Those are the answers to actually making a difference in this.
I love how the sun
Yeah.
came through on you right now.
And you, Robin, do you have any findings you want to highlight in particular?
Absolutely. The experiments that we've run with ChatGPT, that's been my favorite so far. And kind of what I realize is that I don't think a lot of people are experimenting a lot. So when you're working with it, it takes a particular kind of person to work with AML, I think. It's not some job flipping burgers at the drive-in. You have to be really interested in this to actually do it in a great way, and you have to have a certain element of curiosity. But then, like, running more experiments, I think that's what will get us to
The next level?
yeah, maybe
I
just stay
actually
ahead of
agree
things.
that this curiosity as a personality trait is really important in this industry because it is constantly shifting and there's so many rabbit holes you can go down. I think for mine, I'll take it more specific, and that is just like eliminate the bank secrecy laws. Get banks to share information with each other. If they are sure about having identified some, let's say, a criminal network and a particular businesses within that, just tell other banks so they can't get access to a bank account. That would
Yeah.
be mine.
And
But-
public sector. Don't
Yeah.
forget the public sector
Yes.
sharing as well.
Sharing
they
data.
know.
Everybody needs
Everybody's
to share.
sharing data. Oh, I would love for it to get hold of all that data and just plug it into like the AML automation cloud and distribute that data to everyone.
But one point on what you mentioned, Robin, because one thing that we didn't mention, which is at least for now, which is in the report, is this problem of checkbox compliance. And just like data silos, this isn't anything new. We know that this is a problem. But do you feel the R&D budget or the time that you have to experiment or be innovative is at risk with the checkbox compliance and being bogged down in all this, the tasks that you have to do? You don't get time to do what you want to do or innovate the way that you should be doing.
Yeah, good point. I think, like I said, the curiosity, that's the aspect that you'll lose very quickly if you get into the routine of things. And I think checkbox compliance is the killer of creativity and curiosity.
Couldn't agree
I
more.
think also checkbox compliance is just like the sum of all parts that we've been discussing. It just ends up with, okay, not enough time, not enough people, not enough resources. Regulators needs us to fulfill these things. Let's just do that, and then everything else just isn't, don't have time for it.
True.
Okay, we have dived into the report findings, and I think that if you haven't picked up your copy of the AML Megamind report, please, you can do so on our website. There will be a link in the show notes. I think, everyone should get a copy and read it. And also, we have the illustrations in itself is worth a read.
Yeah.
But before we end this episode, let's just take a little moment to look back at the 100 episodes of the podcast. Fredrik, is there a particular guest or an episode that stands out in your mind?
Yeah, for me, it's Magnus Johansson. Like, he was one of the earliest co-hosts as well in many ways. He was at least a very, very expert guest for us. And the episodes we did very early on sort of shaped what we were going to do later. So I'll say the how can you launder money? that setup. And also I have to say the Laundry Live episodes, because obviously the live events, incredible.
Yeah, I think Magnus definitely holds a special place in our hearts. That's the first episode, and they are in Norwegian, unfortunately. But the fun fact around them is that when we launched this podcast in January 2022, we didn't know anything about AML. We were very new to the space, so we used the laundry to teach ourselves. And I remember the first episodes; it was so hard because I just didn't know what to say. Because I didn't have a full grasp of it, so it was really. I'll always remember those as well. And Robin, what are some of you're more of a new co-host to this show, so what are some of the episodes that stand out to you?
Yeah, I think meeting Erica Marat was really cool. Like, she's, actual professor. You didn't mention that, but that's my other nickname as well, as Professor Robin Banks.
Yes, because you've actually held lectures at the the Swedish. You have to help me here.
Yeah, that's okay. Weird flex, but okay. I did hold a lecture at the Swedish School of Economics, but that was besides the point. My favorite episode to date is when I met Erika Marat and talked about the sanctions evasion. That was really mind-opening to hear how they were working with figuring out these networks, and also realizing the commercial aspect of it. Like, if you're a vanilla vendor and you're hit by sanctions to where you used to sell your goods, you're commercially affected, and that's a negative effect that's unintended.
I think for me it's so hard to say, but I think definitely having Dan McCrum, that was in first season, because then I had just read the Wirecard book, just learned about that story, and it was so wild to have the guy who revealed it all on the show. And I just kept saying, oh, I read your book, it's so good. So we had to edit the episode. We spent a day editing the episode because I was just kept saying these words. And then it felt so full circle when we then had Pav Gill on, who was the whistleblower in Wirecard. So I'm like, man, I had never pictured this happening when we started the show in January. I think also like having Oliver Bullough on, that was also just such a good episode, and it's been one of our like best performing all-time episodes. So yeah, I think that one is has to those two I have to mention. But before we end this episode, there's currently a lot of buzz around Google's Notebook LM, which can turn like written documents into snappy conversations, kind of like this one we've had on the show. So we, of course, had to try it. So we gave Google's Notebook LM a copy of the AML Megamind report and asked it to turn it into a podcast. So now for all listeners, you can evaluate yourself. Is it, did we do a better job, or is AI coming for our jobs as podcast hosts? Listen to this clip.
Today we're tackling a phrase that sounds way more complicated than it needs to be. Anti-money laundering, or AML for those in the know.
Catchy.
And to help us decode this shadowy world, we're diving deep into the Anti-Money Laundering Megaminds report. They got insights from over 80 experts.
80? That's a lot of brain power.
It is. And they weren't all your typical financial types either. They even got some former criminals in the mix.
Oh, that's smart. Get the inside scoop right from the source.
Exactly. Kind of like getting a reformed art thief to teach you how to spot a fake Monet.
Love that analogy.
So this report doesn't pull any punches. It starts with a number so big, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. $800 billion to $2 trillion laundered globally every year.
Okay, wow. That's not just pocket change we're talking about.
Not at all. We're talking 2 to 5% of the entire world's economic output just disappearing.
Vanishing into thin air.
And with that, it brings the spin of the laundry to an end. Fredrik and Robin, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find and connect with you?
Fredrik at Strice.ai or my LinkedIn.
First of all, thanks for taking us to Greece. You can connect with me on LinkedIn /Robin Laika or robin@strice.ai.
And thanks to everyone who has been listening. And thanks to everyone who has been listening for the last 100 episodes. We really appreciate every single one of you. If you've enjoyed this episode, go check out the back catalog and follow the laundry of your podcast platform of choice. We'd also love for you to share the podcast on your social media channels, tell your colleagues about it, drop an episode in a group chat, or leave us a review. It really helps people to find us. And if you got a story you think we should be talking about in the next 100 episodes, you can comment on the Strice LinkedIn page, my LinkedIn page, or email laundry@strice.ai. Your host for this episode was me, Marit, producer was Matthew, our editor was Dominic, and our engineer was Nicholas. And The Laundry is proudly produced by Strice, the AML automation cloud. Visit strice.ai for more information. See you next time. And it's fair to say we are just getting started. Here's to 1,000 more episodes.
1,000 more.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Can I get like, yeah.
Woo!
It makes a world go round. It makes a world go round. Money makes a world go round. It makes a world